Sehr geehrte Frau Post, sehr geehrte Frau Brickmoor, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, liebe Gäste. Der Titel der heutigen Konferenz ist als Frage formuliert: Schläft Auschwitz nur? Die ich mir seit geraumer Zeit stelle. Wenn wir die Entwicklungen der letzten Jahre betrachten, dann ist es so, als sei unsere demokratische Gesellschaft, mit der wir über 70 Jahre inneren und äußeren Frieden zu verdanken haben, ernsthaft bedroht. Nationalistische und rechtsradikale Parteien ziehen in die europäischen Parlamente ein. Roma werden, wie 2018 in der Ukraine gesehen, gejagt und ermordet. In Bulgarien werden Menschen aus ihren Heimatdörfern vertrieben und ihre Häuser werden zerstört. Die italienische Regierung ordnete an, Sinti und Roma systematisch zu erfassen. Mitten in den europäischen Metropolen werden Menschen beleidigt, bedroht, bespuckt und körperlich angegriffen, weil sie in der Öffentlichkeit Kippa tragen. Demokratisch gewählte Politiker werden heimtückisch erschossen, weil sie sich zu einer offenen Gesellschaft bekennen. Das alles sind nur einige Beispiele für die beängstigende Entwicklung, mit der wir uns in Europa und in der Welt derzeit konfrontiert sehen. Nationale Überheblichkeit, Chauvinismus und Größenwahn schienen aus unserem Kontinent nach den Erfahrungen des Zweiten Weltkriegs mit Millionen von Toten überwunden oder durch unsere demokratischen Institutionen zumindest im Zaum gehalten. Doch heute erleben wir, wie gerade diese Eigenschaften, die schon die Nationalsozialisten prägten, wieder allerorten ihr Haupt erheben, eine Entwicklung, die mich mit großer Sorge erfüllt, meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren. Der Zivilisationsbruch, für den der Name Auschwitz heute steht, war nicht der Anfang. Die Vernichtung von 500.000 Sinti und Roma und 6 Millionen Juden war vielmehr das Ergebnis einer langjährigen Praxis der Hetze, der Ausgrenzung und der Entrechtung. Sinti und Roma wurden genau wie Juden vom Tag der nationalsozialistischen Machtergreifung an aufgrund ihrer Abstammung zu Feinden des deutschen Volkes erklärt. Dass sie ihre Wurzeln seit mehr als 600 Jahren in Deutschland hatten, dass sie sich als Deutsche fühlten und selbstverständlicher Teil dieser Gesellschaft waren, war von einem Moment auf den anderen unerheblich. Sie wurden vom Säugling bis zum Greis unter rassenbiologischen Kriterien erfasst, ihrer bürgerlichen Rechte beraubt, ghettoisiert und schließlich in die Todeslager deportiert. Heute, fast 75 Jahre nach Ende des Krieges, erinnern wir uns an die NS-Verbrechen und an den Holocaust. Wir erinnern an die Sinti und Roma, die ausgegrenzt, verfolgt und im NS-besetzten Europa vernichtet wurden. Aber auch an die anderen Menschen, die der nationalsozialistischen Willkürherrschaft zum Opfer fielen, weil sie als Juden geboren worden waren, weil sie behindert oder krank waren, weil sie eine andere politische oder religiöse Überzeugung vertraten, weil sie sich zu ihrer Homosexualität bekannten oder weil sie sich in den besetzten Staaten gegen den nationalsozialistischen Terror zur Wehr setzten. Historisches Erinnern bedeutet immer auch gelebte Verantwortung für die Gegenwart. Diese Verantwortung müssen wir uns allen stellen. Das sind wir den Opfern schuldig. In Artikel 1 der Charta der Menschenrechte der Europäischen Union heißt es: Die Würde des Menschen ist unantastbar. Dieser Satz steht zentral für unser demokratisches Gemeinwesen. Es ist das Verständnis der Opfer des Nationalsozialismus, denen ihre Menschenwürde abgesprochen werden sollte. Doch gerade heute scheint es so, als sei mit der Menschenwürde nicht mehr die Würde aller Menschen gemeint. Wie sonst ist es zu erklären, dass innerhalb der Europäischen Union ernsthaft darüber diskutiert wird, ob in Seenot geratene Menschen gerettet werden oder nicht. Wie lässt es sich mit der Menschenwürde in Einklang bringen, dass eine Kapitänin angeklagt wird, weil sie Zivilcourage zeigt und Flüchtende vor dem Ertrinken rettet? Hier dürfen wir als Zivilgesellschaft nicht wegschauen. Hier müssen wir den Finger immer wieder in die Wunde legen, denn genau davon lebt eine wehrhafte Demokratie, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren. Die Menschen müssen sicher sein, dass der Rechtsstaat sie schützt, und sie müssen sich auf seine Institutionen verlassen können. Wenn diese Institutionen, die eigentlich den Schutz unserer freiheitlichen demokratischen Gesellschaft dienen sollen, versagen, wie es deutsche Verfassungsschutzorgane und Geheimdienste beim Kampf gegen den Rechtsterrorismus getan haben, dann führt das zu einem fatalen Vertrauensverlust. Und nur wenn Menschen Vertrauen haben, lassen sich die Menschenrechte von der Menschenwürde über die Freiheit bis zur Gleichheit aller verteidigen. Lassen Sie mich abschließend noch einmal auf die eingangs gestellte Frage, schläft Auschwitz nur, zurückkommen. Ich bin überzeugt, solange wir die Erinnerung an das Geschehene wachhalten, solange wir uns dafür einsetzen, dass Menschenrechte für alle Menschen gleichermaßen gelten, solange wir die demokratischen Grundwerte solidarisch und geschlossen verteidigen und die Menschen ihr Vertrauen in den Rechtsstaat nicht verlieren, solange wird es hier in Europa kein Auschwitz als Zivilisationsbruch, als Mordfabrik mehr geben. Wenn der demokratische Konsens in dem Aufruf gipfelt, nie wieder Auschwitz, dann kann es nicht nur darum gehen, Minderheiten zu schützen, vielmehr geht es um die Demokratie als Ganzes. Eine gesamteuropäische Demokratie, deren Teil wir alle sind, egal welche Sprache wir sprechen, welche Hautfarbe oder sexuelle Orientierung wir haben oder welche Religion wir uns zugehörig fühlen oder deren Fragilität wir uns jederzeit bewusst machen müssen. Aber die Demokratie ist die einzigste Option, die wir haben. Wir dürfen die schrecklichen Erfahrungen des Zivilisationsbruchs, des Holocaust nicht vergessen, sondern müssen uns jederzeit klar machen, dass unsere gelebte Demokratie der letzten Jahrzehnte ein Garant für Frieden und Freiheit und Gleichheit war. Nur so haben wir eine lebenswerte Zukunft. Ich rufe Sie daher alle auf, sich gemeinsam und mit aller Kraft gegen jeden Versuch zu stemmen, unser friedliches Zusammenleben zu zerstören, unsere demokratische Wertegemeinschaft zu spalten und die Erinnerung an die Opfer der nationalsozialistischen Gewaltherrschaft zu vergessen. Haben Sie vielen Dank.
War gar nicht an. Habt ihr auch gehört, ne? Good morning. This is a very special time for me, and I thank Mr. Rosa to have invited me, because we all speak the same language against racism. Racism is an illness in people's head with hate and rejection for our people, the Sinti and the Roma. It's unnecessary. A lot of people have forgotten Auschwitz, Dachau, and other concentration camps, where people were deported, not because they were criminals, but because they were a different race. So it really was a racial war. My name is Rita Pridmore. I'm a Sintetzer from Würzburg. Long time when the military was here, I spoke with my mother to the military soldiers because there was a lot of racism there too. Now they are gone, and I belong to the community of Sant'Egidio out of Rome that asked me 2012 if I would go and talk to them and tell my story and that of my family. My twin sister and I were born 1943 in the Würzburg University. At that time, our family was already registered to go to Auschwitz. And because my mama expected twins, we were very special, even though some of my family was in Auschwitz already. So mama had a choice. She would even give up us family or the whole, give up us twin for the research for Dr. Heide and Mengele. She had to sign to save the family. The rest it was the few people. Mama signed the paper to save them. And when the time came, they took us away from my mama. My sister's name was Rolanda and Irida. My mama couldn't see us for weeks. And then they got the paper for deportation for Auschwitz. Many of us went, except for Grandpa and Grandma. And then my mama went to go to see us. And there was a window with the little babies, and one baby was missing. My mama panicked, and she was very loud at the children's clinic, and the doctors and the nurses came, and she says, "Where is my other girl?" And they wouldn't tell her, so she got hysterical. And the nurses took her down to an office, and then to a room where it said "bat." They opened the door, my mama went inside, and there in the bathtub was my little sister in a little white dress, and her whole little head was bandaged. They had done experiments on her at the age of 6 weeks old to dye her eyes to blue. And Mama, of course, panicked, and she ran past the sister down the hallway into the room and opened the door, and she stole me out of the clinic and ran through the city. It was impossible later to find out how she made it in broad daylight with all the Nazis in the city of Würzburg to the church. And there was a little chapel where Sancta Rita was. And she knocked on the door, and the priest came out, and she explained what had happened. So she had me baptized under emergency conditions under the name from Sancta Rita. Then, by the time she went home, the Gestapo was there and took me away. And nobody knew one whole year where I was. Later on, they found out I was in the Red Cross clinic. From then on, life went on. Mama was sterilized, my grandfather, and many of them, they did not want deported to Auschwitz. And so life went on for us gypsies until later on. I grew up with our people, with our friends. My mama later on married an American, so I went to America for some time. And I experienced some racism there too. So it's not just here. So all our lives, and my life, was with racism, hate, anti-Semitism, and racism. And that's why it is for me important to be here. And I thank Mr. Rosa for inviting me. I thank Sant'Egidio because that gave me a big space to go and tell our story, my story. And I often ask myself, where does the hate come toward us, Sinti and Roma, Jews, and other people that also have to suffer so much under the racial ways that it is today. In my beginning, I speak to college, to students, to churches and schools. It doesn't get any better. It gets harder and harder. to see that after so many years of the Hitler era, Auschwitz, the concentration camp, it was freedom for a while, and now it starts again. And we ask, the students also ask, why? Why is racism and hate permitted toward us again? We are people like everybody else. We just come from different backgrounds. Do we not have the right to exist as Roma and Sinti and Jews, Polish, Czechish? We are humans. I'm born a Roman Catholic. My family didn't go to church every Sunday, but it is in America to go to church every Sunday. And then when you come out to sit together and you hear racial, it's hard to believe you go on Sunday and praise the Lord, and then you get out and you speak in racial ways. It is wrong. Many of us think of what has happened these last years, with the Nazis having so much right to go out there and practice their hate and anti-Semitism, racism against us. Why? Don't they know what happened in Auschwitz and all the other concentration camps? Do we have to live in fear again that it will happen? Mr. Romani has said something that has been with me a long time. Is Auschwitz really just sleeping? It can happen again. If the perpetrators can go out there and practice their hate against us, that is wrong. Why don't the people do something against it? Why can't racism be forbidden under a certain law that might not be there, but we need a law that racism is forbidden against people, against any people, no matter which race you are, what color you are, or what language. Racism is hate, rejection, and a sickness in the head. It's sometimes very hard for me to always keep speaking, but over these 4 or 5 years I'm with Sant'Egidio, nothing has happened. In fact, it's gotten worse. I don't know what we can do about it. But maybe in my head and the people I talk to, also with Sant'Egidio, maybe if there could be a law against racism, against all of us. I thank you.
Good morning, Wachujives. It is quite humbling to be sitting here next to Rita and Romani, and quite a big challenge to be speaking after both of you. My name is Anna Mirga Koszelnicka. I'm Deputy Director of the European Roma Institute for Arts and Culture. It really is an honor to be sitting here today next to Rita and Romani. These are the two of the most inspiring figures for the context of the Roma, especially among the Roma young generation. Rita, whose heart and energy and dedication to travel across the world and share her story has been a driving force for young Roma people across the world. And Romani is an icon of the struggle for recognition of the Holocaust, who has been working for decades to get to the point where we are today. It's people like them that have inspired hundreds of young people to begin organizing the Dekinabi Star event in Krakow in 2009. Since then, the event has grown, and thousands of young people from across the world have joined us here to pay respect to the victims of the Holocaust, but also to reflect on the situation today. With the development, with the creation of the European Roma Institute for Arts and Culture in 2017, there is yet another milestone. ERIAC is an international hub, a transnational institute that works for the recognition of Roma history, Roma culture, and Roma arts. And it is really important that now we come today as partners between ERIAC, the Central Council for German Sinti and Roma, and Ternipe, International Roma Youth Network, to bring together the most important and influential voices and reflect together about the state of the Roma Holocaust recognition, but more importantly, to reflect on the situation today. I don't think there's any speaker that has that can set the tone for this conference better than Rita and Romani just did. As partners, we decided to come together not only to pay respect to the victims of the Holocaust. Of course, that's the main aspect of the commemorations. But it also is about coming together to take stock of what has happened, about the achievements of the last decades, and also about the setbacks of the last few years, to strategize together and find synchronicity, a cooperation, so that we can move forward together. To do this, in the framework of this conference, we are bringing together the most important and influential voices, representing different stakeholders that are very important for advancing in this field. We have, of course, Roma and non-Roma organizations, scholars, cultural institutions, representatives of international intergovernmental organizations, and politicians, as well as young people from across Europe, to discuss issues of relevance. Last night, we began with the panel dedicated to the role of arts and culture in commemorating, but also transmitting our history and the history of the Holocaust. We had an exhibition, which is still on display. We invite you all to join during the breaks and explore the arts. And today, we are going to discuss, on one hand, reflect about the narratives of the Roma Holocausts, the state of knowledge that we have, and especially how this knowledge can be transmitted through institutions, through formal education. We will then be speaking about spaces of memory, so trying to understand how we can represent what has happened to Roma in physical spaces, through monuments, through memorial sites, through state museums in the campsites. And the last panel will be dedicated to discussing the very important issues of what is happening today. And the tone of the conference and the title that is inspired in the quote of Cheja Stojka, it really means for us to say that we need to look back to the past to understand what is happening today and strategize for the future. I don't think I can say anything more deep and important than what has been said so far, so I will just move on quickly to the organizational matter of this conference. I think it's important to highlight that we have simultaneous translation provided in English, Polish, German, and in Romanes. So we encourage also Romanes speakers to join us during questions and answers. Channel 1 is Polish, Channel 2 is English, Channel 3 is German, and Channel 4 is Romanes. We will have a number of breaks and a lunch served here in the space, and we will end today's conference at 5 p.m. exactly. This is where all across Poland, the Warsaw Uprising is commemorated at 5. So we will ask all of you to join us for a moment of silence that is custom here in Poland. I believe that with all important voices, all of you have joined us with your busy schedules and the dedication to share and strategize together with us. I'm sure that it will lead to a very fruitful discussion. So let's create a space for exchange. I encourage all of you, the audience, to also join the discussions. There will be a time for questions and answers that will be moderated during the sessions. And I hope we will come together after this conference richer and smarter in how we can act together to build a peaceful future for all of us. Thank you. Since we're running a bit late, I would now like to invite the speakers and panelists from panel 2. Ms. Joanna Telewicz-Kwiatkowska, the moderator, Gerhard Baumgartner, Liz Fosino, Marco Peczak, and Emran Emlasi.
No, it's me. I have one. Oh.
I think that it's a good moment to start. Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the first panel of the conference, Is Auschwitz Only Sleeping? Sinti and Roma Narratives After Holocaust. My name is Joanna Talewicz-Kwiatkowska, and I will moderate this panel. And I'm pleased to welcome our esteemed experts. Gerhard Baumgartner, who represents Documentation Center of Austrian Resistance. Lise Fouenot from Aix-Marseille University. She is also postdoctoral research fellow at the Central European University. I would like to also welcome Marko Pecak, who represents Roma Education Fund, and Emran Emlazi from Documentation and Cultural Center of German Sinti and Roma. During the first 80 minutes of this conference, we are going to discuss and analyze different examples of Roma and Sinti historical narratives about the Holocaust. Before we start, I would like to add that you will be able to ask the questions after all presentations. So without further ado, I would like to ask Gerhard Baumgartner to start us off.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I feel very honored to be here today and speak to you on this very important conference on a topic which has occupied me for some length of time. I would like to start with a little observation concerning the title of this conference, Is Auschwitz Only Sleeping? When in 2007 we started a program within the framework of IRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, to set up a homepage concerning the fate of the European Roma and Sinti during the Holocaust, as it is called. We started by organizing a conference of Roma and Sinti representatives to ask them what they expected from such a research project and such a website. And the interesting thing was that the emphasis was on don't only concentrate on the persecution, concentrate on the time before persecution, how Roma and Sinti lived before they were persecuted, and what happened to them. And the end result of this exercise, and there were about 35 researchers from all over Europe involved in putting together a homepage that you can see today in 12 languages, is the following. We have analyzed 5 important aspects for the period before persecution by the Nazis started, which were crucial to enable this persecution, to make it possible. The first one was a very stereotypical way, or a stereotypical perception of Sinti and Roma all over Europe, that Sinti and Roma were seen, perceived as the last natives of Europe, the last wild men of Europe, the noble savages, if you want. Some people call them the last Indians of Europe. The second one was all over Europe a policy of discrimination and marginalization of Roma and Sinti throughout the European countries. The third one was a special registration of Roma and Sinti long before the Nazis came to power. And I think in the light of recent developments, we have to say that the present ideas of Italian politicians to again start register Roma and Sinti in special lists is the most dangerous development of all that we see today. So the last 2 factors were actually the presence of a severe economic crisis and, last but not least, the presence of racist parties and organizations with a declared intent to put these racist ideas into actions once they have attained power. I don't have to tell you what happened afterwards. I think you can see the parallels between the situation before 1933 and the present-day situation in large parts of Eastern Europe for yourselves. I come from an institution which has been active in documenting resistance and persecution by the Nazis since the 1960s. Our documentation center was founded by survivors in 1965 because they felt already in 65 that the old Nazis were coming out of the woodwork again. What would they say today? I don't have to tell you that it was very difficult for Sinti and Roma to get recognition for their persecution. And that till about the end of the 1970s and early 1980s, there was no real recognition of the persecution of Roma and Sinti, and no restitution payments for them. I don't have to retell the story of the civil rights movement of the Roma and Sinti, whose basically central figures are present here today. I want to focus on the narratives, and I want to address shortly 3 aspects which I think are important and we can later discuss. First of all, who are the Roma and Sinti that were persecuted? The second question is that perception that Roma and Sinti have kept quiet about their persecution, and the third one, that they left no written documents about their persecution. I will not talk about memory because there is a second panel about this. First of all, who were the Roma and Sinti persecuted? I think here historians have fallen sometimes into a trap which has to do with the stereotypical perception of Roma and Sinti. Roma and Sinti that have only been perceived as a segment of society which is not settled, which is roaming around the country, which has very little to do with European culture. This is something that we have to overcome. And research, historical research of the last 2-3 decades has shown us that Roma and Sinti were not only present in all the European countries for hundreds of years, and in Europe as such for at least 1,000 years, just like the Hungarians, for example, but also that they were integral members of all layers of society. I will only point out the work of our Polish colleague and historian Mroz, who has documented how Roma and Sinti had a kind of social mobility upwards in all layers of European society. For example, in the Austrian monarchy, right up into the ranks of the nobility. So there were noblemen of Roma descent since the 18th century. But European society tends to lose sight of them and refer to so-called gypsies only as that part of society that has no fixed abode, is traveling around the country. And I think we have to get rid of that, because this small group is not representative, was not representative for Roma society. There is a census taken within the Habsburg monarchy in 1893. And it turns out in this census that 70% of Roma population was completely sedentary. A further 20% were migrating to work on a seasonal level, like many other people, and only 7% were so-called, at that time, wandering Roma. But it is the social perception of this 7% that will determine our attitude towards Sinti and Roma in the whole of the 20th century. The second misconception into which historians and some Roma tend to fall is that Roma were not speaking about their persecution. When Chaya Stoica published her first book in 1988, called We Live in Hiding, Wir leben im Verborgenen, it was hailed as the first account of persecution by a survivor. This is, of course, not true. There were many other attempts. I'm quite proud to be the director of an institution where in 1966, the first monograph of the persecution of Roma and Sinti was published in Vienna, small booklet, which contained more than 40 personal testimonies of Roma survivors. about what happened to them. But the difference was that at the time, there was no audience. Nobody wanted to listen and hear what the survivors, the Roma and Sinti survivors, had to say. And the third misconception is that Roma and Sinti did not leave written testimony. Now here I come to the last project that I was part of and which was coordinated by ERIAC, or its predecessor actually, not ERIAC, sorry, the Digital Roma Archive. And within the framework of the Roma Archive, there was a project headed by Carola Finks, who unfortunately can't be here today. It's called Voices of the Victims. And Carola Finks and her team of 14, some of other fellow co-workers and researchers are here today. We have set out to document written testimonies of Roma persecution during the time of persecution, so during Nazi periods and the first 2 years afterwards. And we have managed to do this for all 27 countries of the European Union. And once you start looking, you will see that Roma have been writing down their history. The idea that Roma and Sinti basically share a non-written culture is a myth. Also, the perception that it was an illiterate society. Roma and Sinti were part of every segment of European culture, and their literacy depends on the status and the layer of society they are living in. And if they were poor, their literacy was poor, just like the peasants. And if they were middle class, their literacy was typical for middle class families. And if they were upper class, their literacy was typical of upper class families. And they left very important and impressive documents about it. And they were arguing, and I will finish with this, I think one of the most impressive documents in this collection is one of 11 Roma and Sinti from a village. They were workers, they were organized in the trade unions, and they complained in 1938, after Austria was annexed to the German Reich, ironically to Hitler, about their treatment by the local Nazis, and they were claiming their constitutional rights. And they were insisting on their constitutional rights to be treated as equal subjects of society and the state. And I think it's a very interesting and impressive document that deserves to be read and spread, because it shows us that Roma and Sinti were everything but the naive, wild, last remnants of some kind of ethnographic group or tribe in Europe. They were full members, and I think that historiography must not fall into this ethnographic trap. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gerhard, for your extremely important presentation. And now I would like to ask Liz to share with us your research about the Roma resistance in France. Liz would like to start with a very short 2 minutes movie, and after that she will present her topic.
là. En fait, des ânes qui mort d'ailleurs. Et ma sœur Barthélémy est là. Et ma deuxième sœur aînée est là. Voilà. La patron Památného n'était pas dessus parce qu'il était jeune, puis il était à l'hôpital. C'est ça qui est pas sur le côté.
Et pendant toute cette époque, vos parents, ils reparlaient de la guerre?
Mais ils n'aimaient pas trop parler non pas de la guerre, parce qu'il y avait trop de souvenirs dans la tête. Hein. Ils ont beaucoup souffert dans le camp, donc il n'y avait pas beaucoup d'époque, mais on n'a pas parlé beaucoup, mon père. Hein. Quelques passages comme ça, il me peut dire un petit peu comme ça, mais il n'aimait pas. C'est pour dire, on a été caressés dans le petit souvenir. C'est pas loin, pourtant, il est à côté. Il a jamais retourné pour voir comme notre vie. C'est rapide comme ça. Pour une misère, peut-être, pour une chose qui s'est passée. Même moi, je n'ai même pas été moi.
Jamais?
J'avais le pas aussitôt quand il est parti des grands, donc jamais il y aurait eu.
Et la guerre de 39-45, vous avez déjà raconté votre histoire avant?
L'histoire de camp, là? Non, c'est la première fois que je vois raconter à
À vos enfants,
Oui, à mes enfants, oui, ça, oui, ça, comme dans les politiques, oui, ça, oui. Ah oui, ça, tous, oui.
vous leur racontez souvent?
Ben, pas trop souvent, non. Pas trop souvent.
Hello? Can you hear me? Yeah. So this film is an extract from a 2-hour video testimony recorded last May in France. During the war, because they belong to the administrative category of nomads, Léon Alfred Ventrestin and his family were interned successively in 2 French camps, Avrilé-les-Ponceaux and Montreuil-Bellay, from 1940 to 1944. Although, as we saw in this film, his photograph appears on the cover of one very famous French book on internment in France, it was only last May that he told his story to non-Manouche for the first time. He was 83 at that time. However, Léon Ventrestin had long been waiting for this moment. One reason was his conviction that if his father had been able to tell his story of his internment, it would have been quite a relief for him, and that therefore he would have not died so young. In France, until 2019, no state-funded national collection of testimonies on the persecution of nomads was conducted. Since 2010, some testimonies have been collected, but no public funding was received. How can this situation be explained? While 20th century French historians have insisted on the importance of oral testimonies for writing on the Second World War, historians of the nomad has had an almost exclusively archival and administration-based approach to their subject of study. If French historical studies have described the persecution of Roma and Sinti during the war, none has ever focused on the voices of the persecuted. Since the way history is written has direct implication on people's life, I would like to talk today about the consequences of a historiography that has not yet taken into account the words of the persecuted, and I'm talking about France here. So, as Léon Ventrestin said, the generation of people who were between 20 and 40 years old when they were interned or placed under assigned residency in France, they disappeared in a very short period of time. For example, Denise Weiss, who spent 5 years in the Jargeau camp, lost most of her family members in the years following the war. Anna Ferré, who spent her first months on earth in a camp in Belgium, lost her 37-year-old mother. And when those witnesses speak of the death of their loved one in the years following the war, They incriminate the continuation of persecution and the absence of recognition of their parents' suffering. Therefore, the difference between the observation of anthropologists and the words of the last survivors is striking. While anthropologists have suggested that Manouche would maintain a kind of taboo by not talking about death, the last survivor I met insists on the detrimental effect of silence on the life expectancy of their parents and relatives. Michel Lagrené, another witness we met a few months ago, was very clear about the symbolic violence represented by the lack of interest of historians in the testimonies of victims. Such a denial of speech, he said, had much to do with the continuation of persecution to this day. As a result of the absence of interest of historians in their testimonies, some people started writing their own testimonies. Léon Ventrestin, we saw on the movie, wrote his story on handkerchiefs, as you can see here. Anna Ferré wrote on a notebook. Here is what you can read on the latter. I write to say what has been on my heart for a long time because I think it will make me feel better. Because other living people are in the same situation as me, they can understand and share the pain I suffered being deported one day and put in concentration camp for nothing. Contrary to what can sometimes be heard about the memory of Roma and Sinti, all the people we met during the 2019 Testimonies collection had been waiting for a very long time to tell their stories. This lack of concern on the part of historians has not only constituted a strong bias in the historical narrative, but also the source of a political injustice. The absence of a proper historical work in scholarly studies opened the way to unjust public policies. So let us now see how historical knowledge has been biased by the absence of testimonies. The absence of such testimonies had had several consequences. First of all, in terms of historical knowledge. The daily lives of internees and assignees have not been the subject of any studies in France. And as a consequence, without prior historical work centered on testimonies, it has not been possible in France to implement a public policy of compensation for sufferings and spoliation. So, as I said, the absence of testimonies had consequences on the historical narrative, since the interpretation of archival document can lead to errors if nothing is known about how the Roma and Sinti lived at the beginning of the 20th century. So I will give you two examples of such misinterpretation. So the first one, in French concentration camps, quite a lot of weddings took place. Some historians have interpreted this marriage as the emergence of festive and joyful moments inside the concentration camp. Wrongly so. Indeed, talking to witnesses and a more detailed analysis of the archives show something very different. It was necessary to legitimize unions in camps to avoid separations, since many internees were not officially married before the war. Weddings in camps were therefore not festive moments, but a strategy to resist family separation. So here is another example of misinterpretation. French historian who worked on the archive of the Jargeau camp concluded that the internment has resulted in a renewal of the Catholic faith on the basis of many internees attending church services. But when talking to the witnesses, the story is quite different. Denise Weiss explained to us that one day, all the Jargeau camp internees had gone to the camp church because the priests had promised them to share with them the blood and body of Christ, namely wine and bread. However, when the internees realized that there would be no distribution of wine and bread, the celebration almost turned into a riot, and few were the people who attended the following services. So another remark is to the point. As French historians have relied on administrative and police archives only, they have focused almost exclusively on the phenomenon of internment. In some respect, this is a perfectly justified choice, since such long-term imprisonment, collective imprisonment, sometimes up to 6 years of children, women, and men, is unique in French history. But this focus has also its drawback. It has let aside other aspects of the persecution, such as the fate of the thousands of people under assigned residency on the French territory, the active participation of Sinti and Roma in the French resistance, and also execution of Roma and Sinti that took place during the liberation of France. Among the 8 persons I met during the first months of the project, 7 told spontaneously stories about resistance. Anna Ferry's father had been a resistance fighter in Belgium. Luc Renard's brother was a smuggler. Ernestine Steinbach's brother was in a maquis, it's an underground fighter. Marius's Lucy's uncle was also in a maquis before he joined the army. As a historian, I wanted to check in the archive if I could find proof of what they said, and I systematically found evidence. A Belgian commander certified in writing that Anna Ferry's father had been part of a patriotic organization. Ernestine Steinbach's brother-in-law died during a battle between his maquis and German troops. Alexandre Lucy, Marius's uncle, received a decoration at the liberation. So a great lack of consideration for the voices of Roma and Sinti explained that a history of their engagement in the resistance and a description of the complexity of their life during World War II in France has not been written yet. But fortunately, French Roma and Sinti did not wait for historians to pass their history off to their offspring. And I would like to end this presentation with another quote from Anna Ferry's notebook. She writes, "I write to share our long-forgotten memory, and above all, to make sure that my family never forgets. That's why I write with my words, my bumpy handwriting, and my spelling mistakes." And I will also like to add that we have the chance here today to have in the room Monsieur Raymond Gurem, who is one of the most powerful voices of the French Roma resistance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz, for your very eye-opening presentation. And now I would like to ask Marco Pecak to speak. And Marco is going to share with us his research about the representation of Roma in European curricula and textbook.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marco Pecak. First, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. Very humbled, and it's really an honor to be here and to speak about this important research. Research that really has the potential to influence not only just textbooks, but through textbooks, also societies. And so the project was started in 2012 in partnership with Roma Education Fund, Council of Europe, and George Eckert Institute for International Textbook Research. The project overall aim is to research the representation of Roma and Sinti in European textbooks and curricula. The primary goals were to identify incorrect and misrepresentation of Roma based on the text, images, narrative creation, and overall content that can create and reinforce stereotypes, negative social discourses, promote discriminatory beliefs in society, and hinder the development of Roma identity, and also to deter Roma communities as being part of the greater society. The second primary goal of the research is to empower and build the capacity of Roma professionals and academics. With this goal, what we did is we recruited researchers of Roma origin to conduct the research for countries which have a large Roma population, but also which Roma Education Fund targets its activities. I would say that the researchers were not just influential, but they were critical in the research process. They developed the research questions that needed to be asked, the structure of the reports, the coding schemes, also the analysis. So within this research project, we provided training in textbook analysis, critical discourse analysis, and then also advocacy. The other goal is policy advocacy, to have evidence-based policy to correct the lack and misrepresentation, to place curricula and textbook reform on the policy agenda. In workshops with the researchers, we developed and discussed what the vision of the research would be. And through this workshop, the vision is as follows: for textbooks to empower educators and students to foster a diverse, just, and fair society. I think I'll go through quickly the methodology, as I don't want to spend too much time. But the sample includes state-approved textbooks or state-recommended textbooks in 20 European countries. If several editions were available, the newest editions were researched. If there isn't an approved list or a recommended list, then the textbooks analyzed were connected to the curricula. Further, we used mainstream books, meaning that books that were mostly used in locations, schools, and which teachers used. We excluded specific books on Romani language and history because we wanted to see what was in the majority of the schools and what has the greatest reach in terms of the countries and in Europe. So the researchers went from first page to last page. Mentions were found, they documented it, scanned the mentions. But I think the important part is the analysis. So some examples of how the analysis was conducted was looking at how Roma are characterized. What is the role of Roma and Sinti in society? What is the voice and the source of the voice within the text? What is, if any recognition or contribution to society? Are prejudices challenged, or are they reinforced or even created? So why is this research important? There's a phrase that really resonates with the purpose of the research, and it is as follows. Curricula reflects and reproduces a social curriculum, which reinforces the marginalization or invisibility of particular minority groups. National textbooks and curricula are utilized in building a narrative and a definition of society, nation, and the creation of a common social, national, and community identity, as well as connecting these ideologies with social and cultural collective values. The teaching of the Roma Holocaust is important for reclaiming and restoring the group's shared memory of Romani identity, cohesion, cultural preservation, and to ensure the community's constructive and resilient responses to past and current trauma, violence, and discrimination. This is why the representation of Roma and Sinti in textbooks is important. When students hear their stories and hear their history in history books, social science books, and geography books, they are constructing identities based on past events, history, on contemporary characteristics of society and its institutions, social sciences, and the population of the society in geography books. If there's a lack or misrepresentation of Roma in textbooks, this leads to a missed opportunity to build a social identity that includes Roma, both in the national social identity and for students to hold on to and strengthen their Romani identity. So Roma and Sinti need to see themselves in textbooks when they are constructing national and social identities. Also, non-Roma need to see Roma as a part of the national and social identity. In the curricula analysis, there were 5 out of the 20 countries which mentioned Roma and Sinti in relation to the Holocaust or experiences in during World War II. Within the textbook's results, we had a coding scheme, and here are the themes. And the themes were developed by the researchers as well. So the themes are Roma position and challenges in history, which was broken down in 2 parts. One on a European scale, but this is really left for the experiences during the Holocaust and World War II. And then Roma as a demographic minority, Roma culture, Roma in contemporary society. And so as you can see from the graph, the Roma mentions related to Nazi persecution and the Holocaust are more than 45% of the total mentions, with a total of 418 mentions related to the Roma suffering during World War II and the Nazi regime. In total, 850 books were analyzed. Around 35% of them mention Roma or Sinti. with over 900 total mentions. So it's not just important to look at the numbers, right? And so this is why we use also critical discourse analysis. And within that critical discourse analysis, these are the findings. There were a few mentions of Roma Holocaust and suffering during World War II that was contextualized. Here the mentions where they were contextualized involved Roma people, history of oppression. Although most of the mentions are just statistics, that Roma were also victims of the Nazi regime. An active voice, Roma voice, is almost non-existent, except in a handful of cases. There are also a few cases that there's a narrative of empowerment, resilience, or resistance. Survivor or witness accounts are also very rare. And ideas and lessons of social justice, anti-discrimination, and humanity and human rights are almost never present when there is a mention of Roma and Sinti experiences during the Holocaust. A few countries have textbooks that do use the Romani word for Holocaust, Paramos, Samudari Pen. So when you look at the results by region, you can see some different regional results. The graph shows that areas with higher Roma population actually have a lower Roma mention per textbook relative to countries with low Roma population. And when you look at the Roma mentions related to the Holocaust and World War II, the mention per textbooks that we see, there's also regional differences. So for instance, in Western Europe, states have a large number of mentions per textbooks compared to Central and Eastern Europe. But then also when you look at the mentions within these regions, you can see, for instance, in Western states, almost all of the historical mentions are only around World War II and the Holocaust experiences, but no mentions of history regarding Roma culture, society, or community. So it is really overly dominated through a narrative of victimization and othering, and not necessarily of community, resistance, or other aspects of Romani culture. So there are some good examples that were found. So an example of an active Romani voice, and also an example of a narrative of resistance. So the story of Sinto Johann Trollmann. So he became the German cruiserweight champion for 8 days when the Nazi Professional Association relinquished his title. In 1942, Trollmann was taken to a concentration camp where he was struck to death by security guards. And in this mentions, students are not only taught about the discriminatory practices he and other Sinti and Roma faced, but also his act of defiance. So for instance, in the textbooks, there's a description that Trollmann in his last fight dyed his hair blonde and refused to defend himself as an act of nonviolent activism. Further, in some textbooks, there are witness accounts and survivor accounts of Sinti women survivors. So Christine Winterstein and Ashta Father are some of those mentions, where full portraits and stories of these survivors were included. The context includes contents about Sinti origins, culture, and history, as well as experiences in the concentration camps. Further, the lessons also include aspects of restorative justice, describing the reparations paid to them and their families, as well as other Sinti and Roma. Other survivor witness accounts describe, for instance, in one Romanian book, an individual who returned to Romania, and his experiences motivated him to become politically active and to make a difference in his Roma community. So in these cases, Roma are tied to actual individuals, not just a number of victims, but a face of individuals that were humanized. Further, there were also lessons of social justice and anti-discrimination, but again, only a handful of cases. So besides rare cases of reparations, there was also a section in a textbook which was titled, "How Can Prejudice and Discrimination Lead to Persecution?" Okay. And in this textbook message, the detail of the history of prejudice and discrimination Roma people faced before World War II in the Nazi regime provides the student lessons on how a history of prejudice led to Nazi persecution and how Roma continue to face prejudice and discrimination. So I think it is important that in these mentions, building values of social justice and collective action against further community suffering is necessary. The teaching of human suffering needs to be done in a way where the individual reading and the student understands the cause of the trauma through the development and realization of a sense of moral responsibility towards human suffering. In other words, teaching of Roma of human suffering should cause the student and collective society to define their relationship with the suffering others in a way which facilitates their positionality and connects other suffering with their own. And this is why it is important in textbooks and in the classrooms, representation of Roma and Sinti is done in a way which connects non-Roma's own humanity to the humanity of Roma and Sinti. Thus, the representation cannot be in a form of simple statistics of stating that Roma were victims of the Holocaust in passing. Personalization with the process of historical education needs to be present in order to allow the identification in the cause of traumatic events, which instill a sense of moral and social collective responsibility and solidarity with the Roma community. The connection of one's individual own humanity with that of the Romani experiences of crimes against humanity ensures that Roma and other groups who have faced historical and current discrimination and violence are not left alone to suffer. So I would like to, these are the recommendations, but I would like to just have a note that these are not finalized and we still need to go through a process of approval within our institutions. But what we have found is generally what we mention in terms of the mentions of the textbooks, that there's a lack of active voice, so this needs to be corrected. Also, that there needs to be a narrative of resilience and not only victimization. But then also the pedagogical tools, like the current and pedagogical tools need to teach lessons on prejudice, discrimination, and human rights, using individual and community stories to connect the Roma traumatic experiences and suffering to a broader human suffering. There also needs to be improved national processes of approving and screening textbook content, not only to ensure that the Roma and Sinti are mentioned when there's topics around the Holocaust and World War II, but also that the criteria related ensures that Roma are not victimized, and that builds a narrative based on human rights. And also in rebuilding lost years of memory construction. Further sources need to be created, but also connection of the sources to authors and publishing houses. So as many of you all here know and have experienced, there are sources out there, but they need to be connected to the right individuals, authors, publishing houses, and respective government institutions. And then further, teachers are the ones who are translating these lessons to the students. And if they don't have the skills, abilities, knowledge, and perspective to be able to teach the content as it is designed or as it's supposed to be designed, then again, we are missing we have a great missed opportunity. So that it is all from my side, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Marco. And now, Emran Elmazi. So, floor is yours.
Liebe Johanna, ganz herzlichen Dank. Ich würde gerne darauf eingehen wollen, wie sich die historischen Narrative im Laufe der Jahre und Jahrzehnte auch geändert hat. Ich glaube, wenn man über die historischen Narrative an den Holocaust und den Sinti und Roma spricht, darf man auf keinen Fall auch die Vergangenheit auch drauf sprechen. Die historische Narrative hat auch zum Holocaust auch geführt. Die Frage ist aber auch, wie ging es nach dem Zweiten Weltkrieg auch weiter, vor allem auch in den jeweiligen Ländern, in denen Sinti und Roma gelebt haben. Der Holocaust, es gab keine Narrative in dem Fall. Es gab zwar den Holocaust, der aber nicht anerkannt worden ist. Ich darf nur mal kurz zur Erinnerung rufen, dass eine Bundesgerichtsentscheidung von 1956 sagte, dass Sinti und Roma nicht aus rassischen, sondern aus kriminalpräventiven deportiert worden sind. Das ist einfach runtergebrochene Wiedergabe. Das führt dazu, dass es eine Narrative, eine Anerkennung des Holocaustes an sich gar nicht gab. Und hier stellt sich nochmal die Frage, welche Rolle spielen Selbstorganisationen? Und wie hat sich diese Narrative verändert? Und vor allem, wie können wir gemeinsam gestalten, dass sich diese Narrative, die wir als Minderheitsangehörige und vor allem hier Vertreter, die in den jeweiligen Jahrzehnten das herausgekämpft haben, nicht in Vergessenheit gerät und dass der Holocaust nur eine Randbemerkung wird in der Geschichte, eine Randbemerkung an der Geschichte der Sinti und Roma. Meine Vorredner haben alle erwähnt, dass der Holocaust an den Sinti und Roma teilweise auch widersprüchlich, dass es erstmal Erwähnungen gab schon in den 60er Jahren, teilweise auch Schriftstücke, auch vor der Kriegszeit. Die Frage ist, welchen geschichtlichen Einwand haben Sie gefunden? Welche geschichtliche Wahrnehmung haben Sie bekommen? Nun stellt sich die Frage, warum haben Sie es nicht bekommen? Ich glaube, das ist die Kernfrage. Warum? Es ist nicht so, dass es keine Selbsterzeugnisse gibt. Es gibt sie wohl wahr. Die Frage ist, wie sehr hat man sich damit beschäftigt? Warum haben sehr viele Sinti und Roma nicht nur in Deutschland, sondern europaweit nicht über ihr Schicksal direkt mit Nicht-Angehörigen der Minderheiten gesprochen? Auch dazu gibt es Gründe, die auch ganz menschlich und auch nachvollziehbar sind. Angst. Angst, dass sich das Geschehene nicht wiederholt. Ein fehlendes Vertrauen, ein fehlendes Miteinander, fehlende Allianzbildungen. Diese sind zum Glück besser geworden. Das ist aber auch den Leuten hier im Raum zu verdanken, vor allem Herrn Rose zu verdanken, vor allem auch Angie Mirga, die auch in jeweiligen Vorarbeit geleistet haben, dass eine Allianzbildung da ist und dass wir auch so viele Vertreter heute in diesem Raum haben aus staatlichen Institutionen, die aber auch gemeinsam eine Allianz bilden, damit unsere Belange auch stärker wahrgenommen werden können. Was machen wir in Deutschland als Dokumentations- und Kulturzentrum deutscher Sinti und Roma eigentlich, um diese Narrative, um die Erinnerung an den Holocaust, dass sie nicht in Vergessenheit gerät, aber vor allem, dass sie auch wahrgenommen wird und in rechtem Licht dargelegt wird? Es gibt Aktivitäten, also ich kann es mal in 3 Säulen beschreiben. Lernen, begegnen und bewegen. Lernen über Sinti und Roma. Wir sind nationale Minderheiten. Wir sind Minderheiten. Wir sind Teil unseres Staates. Es sollte im Kontext der Curricula eigentlich per se sein, dass man an den Holocaust, an den Sinti und Roma erinnert, weil das sind die Bürger des Staates, Bürger ihres Staates. Also, dass man keine Erkämpfung braucht. Es müsste, wie gesagt, eine Selbstverständlichkeit sein. Aber in diesem Punkt sind wir noch nicht angelangt. Auch der nächste Punkt, sozusagen, das Begegnen in verschiedenen Aktivitäten, Abbau von Vorurteilen, das Kennenlernen, das Gemeinsame, das Miteinander, durch Workshops, durch einfache Treffen. Und erst dann kann man gemeinsam was bewegen. Und darauf kommt es eigentlich drauf an. Gemeinsam positive Schritte für unsere Gesellschaft, in denen wir alle leben, in denen wir alle was Positives, was Gutes beitragen wollen, denn wir sind alle Teil unserer Gesellschaft, alle Teil unserer Gesellschaften. Und nicht mehr und nicht weniger. So sollte es zumindest mal in der Theorie sein. In der Praxis sieht es anders aus. Ich durfte die letzten Tage einen Holocaust-Überlebenden aus Kroatien begleiten, der seit 9 Jahren obdachlos ist. Ein muslimischer Kroate, der immer noch Ausgrenzung erfahren muss in seinem Leben, auch in einem demokratischen Land wie Kroatien, der immer noch kein Obdach hat. Das ist Europa 21. Jahrhundert. Und nur gemeinsam können auch da was verändern. Deswegen freut es mich sehr, später im Laufe des Nachmittages 100 von 500 Jugendlichen, die wir aus 25 Ländern hierhin gebracht haben, in der Konferenz teilnehmen werden. Weil diese Menschen, Sinti, Roma, Armenier, Juden, ganz normale Jugendliche, gemeinsam können wir die Narrative bestimmen, gemeinsam können wir die Narrative auch verändern und gemeinsam können wir das, was geschah, nicht in Vergessenheit geraten lassen. Und das ist eigentlich das Tragische dabei. Vergessen, abstumpfen und alles, was man errungen hat, als gegeben wahrnehmen. Es ist es nicht. Ich möchte nicht zu sehr der Zeit der Diskussion, den Fragen vorwegnehmen. Daher bedanke ich mich bei Ihnen ganz herzlich und wünsche Ihnen noch eine angenehme und anregende Diskussion. Dankeschön.
And thank you, all of you, for sharing your fascination and the important presentation. Sorry. And I look at the time and I see that we have just only 5 minutes before a coffee break, but I believe that we have sometimes maybe around 10 minutes to ask the questions. So please, if you have any question, this is the time for this. Yes.
Hello, Karolina Mirgadaniek. I'm here representing Ternipa International Roma Youth Network. I wanted to ask the panelists. It was amazing to hear the stories of the. For me, like also it's getting me a little bit upset about this historians who are also neglecting that part of history and not reaching out into the stories of the survivors. I mean, for us, also coming up with the Dikina Star was a way to create the space for young people to hear those stories, and we felt this sense of urgency that the time is running, and we're not gonna have them with us forever. And for me, the question is there this kind of sense of urgency, and how come this happened that the historians who should be digging out the truth are really like feeling comfortable with just the narrative of the state, let's say, in view of the, for example, in the French. So if you could tell me from your point of view as an academic, and also like Emran, if you can share also from the side of the museum, the work that you do in actually making this history happen. How is this? Is there any coalition, cooperation going on really digging out these stories and giving the voice to those who don't have one?
Go and then Gerhard, yeah, okay.
As a short answer, I think why did historians neglect to research testimonies? Basically, for a long time, because they didn't know and didn't believe that they could exist. So this has to do with a lot of misconceptions that also historians share. First of all, I would say the misconception was that, as Emran said, for a certain time, there was no recognition that there was a racist persecution of Roma. That's the first point. Then, when it dawned on the historians actually that Roma were persecuted on racist terms just like the Jews, they looked at the wrong sources. They looked at Gestapo sources, not knowing that the Gestapo was not responsible for the persecution of the Roma. It was the criminal police and the social services. The amazing thing is that the most documents that we have today about deportation into camps of Roma and Sinti come from the archival sources of social services of European states. The deportation of Roma and Sinti to camps in Poland was to a large extent organized and paid for by social service institutions. Who would have thought that? We didn't know that. Yeah? And the third thing is, as I said, this shared stereotypical view of Roma and Sinti society as something special, yeah? That they are caught in a kind of culture of their own, which is so different from European. Yeah? And I think this is a problem for historians as well. Yeah? It took some time before we realized that these people were writing and they were leaving the same kind of historical documents as many others. And once you start to look for it, you will find it. And that is what is happening since the last 5-10 years maybe. And a whole new picture, I think, is evolving.
Emran?
I think there are different layers. The answer can be not a question, you can give an easy answer. So, I think in the past, how Gerhard also mentioned, it's also a part of the structures, but also part of how universities are working. You know, if the professor doesn't know about the topic, for sure he will not just make a topic for his students. So it's giving by generation, from generation by generation. But I cannot say that it's a general issue, because I have met a lot of historians also in the past, which are also close engaged with this topic. We have had in the documentation center the first research about the Holocaust on the Sinti and Roma in the Balkans, not just in Germany, in the 90s. That means also in the Soviet Union and Ukraine. There are some steps done also from researchers, and it becomes much more and much more visible, and it becomes much more a topic for the researchers. Still, it's a lot to do. We in Heidelberg, we have close cooperations with the university, also with the pedagogical university, also to push the topic, because if no one there who is pushing the topic, that means no one will pick them up and bring it as an issue for the students. So it's also part of the whole society. That's why I'm also coming back of the society and not just on the Roma and Sinti self-organizations, to take the topics and to push it on the front, that someone can take it and bring it much more forward, because we don't have the power, we don't have the times, and for sure it's not just our responsibility. It's the responsibility of the whole society. And we as the youngsters, okay, I was some years younger than now, we did, because we taken the fruits of the activists of the years before. And it's now our responsibility to bring this thing forward, to bring this also to the universities, and to have a better quality on that.
Thank you. Marco?
Yeah, quickly, I guess more, less like in a specific way to answer your question, and it relates to the history before the events of how Roma suffering was invalidated and dehumanized. And for the events to even happen, this sort of social ideology needed to be in place. But then afterwards, with the lack of recognition that the suffering of Roma is valid enough for any sort of restorative justice, also indicates the social values which is embedded into the academic and historical authors' values as well. So in a way, it's those people who hold the ability to document this still had that ideology that Roma and Sinti suffering is not valid. And so this is why they did not. And, and still continue today. I'm sure it's still embedded into some either direct or indirect sort of ideologies and beliefs.
Thank you so much. And do we have one more question or comments?
Ja, ich möchte auch etwas anders an die Frage herangehen. Diese Beschreibung der Situation hat nichts mit der sozialen Wahrnehmung zu tun, sondern sie hat etwas damit zu tun, dass wenn man zum Beispiel die Aufarbeitung der Shoah sieht, dann war die Aufarbeitung der Shoah vor allen Dingen jüdischen Historikern zu verdanken, die sich mit diesem Teil der Vernichtungspolitik der Nazis beschäftigt haben. Das waren Leute, die aus verschiedenen Ländern, aus Amerika und so weiter gekommen sind. Bei Sinti und Roma hat es das alles nicht gegeben. Bei uns gab es mit dem Zusammenbruch des Dritten Reichs, und die Deutschen haben das nicht als eine Befreiung gesehen, sondern sie haben das als eine Kapitulation gesehen. Und wir hatten ja sehr starke Nachwirkungen in der Nichtanerkennung der Verbrechen. Es ist ja von Ihnen erwähnt worden, das 56er Urteil, das die Verfolgungsmaßnahmen noch begründet hat, also im Sinne der Nazi-Ideologie. Und da wir selbst über keine eigenen Historiker verfügten, haben unsere Menschen diese Erfahrungen mit sich selbst ausmachen müssen. Und wir als Kinder, die Nachgeborenen, wir wuchsen im Schatten von Auschwitz auf. Wir sahen die Wunden unserer Eltern und unserer Verwandten. Und unsere Eltern hatten selbst davor Angst, uns die wahre Geschichte zu erzählen. Für uns war, wenn wir etwas davon vernommen haben, das Ganze ein Abenteuer. Erst viel später mit dem Erwachsenenwerden haben wir begriffen, was die Nazis unseren Menschen angetan haben. Die Demütigungen, die Erniedrigungen, ja, diese gesamte Situation, das Unfassbare. Die Juden haben gesagt, dass dies ein Bruch in ihrer europäischen Geschichte gewesen ist. Denn die Erfahrungen haben sie ja mit den kollaborierenden Staaten gemacht, mit den besetzten Staaten gemacht und natürlich mit Nazi-Deutschland gemacht. 2000-jährige Geschichte der Juden ist beendet worden mit dem Machtantritt der Nazis. Sie sind rechtlos gemacht worden. Sie wurden kriminalisiert in allen Fakten, auch mit dem Begriff des Sozialproblems, des Kriminalitätsproblems und anderen Fakten, die in den Medien damals verbreitet worden sind, der Nazis wie Stürmer, völkischer Beobachter und so weiter. Und das Ganze haben wir auch mitgemacht. Die historische Aufarbeitung hat begonnen mit der Bürgerrechtsarbeit. Wir haben von der Bundesrepublik als Nachfolgestaat, als demokratischer Staat eingefordert, dass sich Deutschland auch diesem Kapitel, ja, der Vernichtung einer halben Million Sinti und Roma stellen muss. Dass dies ein Völkermord war, der bürokratisch in Berlin organisiert worden ist, der vorbereitet worden ist mit entsprechenden Diffamierungen, Ausgrenzungen und vor allen Dingen mit der Rechtlosigkeit, in der man unsere Menschen gestellt hat und die dann deportiert worden sind. Also wir müssen nicht die Schuld noch bei uns suchen, ja, die Schuld liegt beim Staat. Der Staat hätte sich mit dieser Geschichte beschäftigen müssen. Die Bundesrepublik hat das jetzt getan. Wir haben in Berlin ein Denkmal, das an die Dimension des Holocaust von Sinti und Roma in Europa informiert. Dieses Denkmal ist nicht irgendwo an einem Stadtrand, es ist im Zentrum, es ist direkt am Brandenburger Tor. Das hat bei uns große Anerkennung gefunden. Der Anticiganismus, der hat genau seine Struktur eben darin, er ist jahrhundertelang gezüchtet worden. Er war notwendig für die damalige Obrigkeit, weil mit dem Antiziganismus genauso wie mit dem Antisemitismus, ja, konnte man Probleme auf Minderheiten abwälzen, wie wir das heute wieder sehen. Heute werden die Diskussionen wieder in ähnlicher Weise gegenüber Juden geführt. Ich habe das ja in meinem Referat hier beziehungsweise in der Einleitung zu dieser Konferenz sehr deutlich gesagt, welcher Problematik wir uns stellen müssen. Und ich sage, und damit will ich das beenden, die Sicherheit der Minderheit ist für die Demokratie wichtig, weil die nationalen Kräfte, die suchen immer Sündenböcke und die stellen sie in den Vordergrund, um die Ängste der Menschen zu benützen, um ihr eigenes Süppchen zu kochen. Und die historische Aufarbeitung und die Bewusstseinsbildung über die 600-jährige Geschichte unserer Minderheit gehört zum Selbstverständnis, dass wir Teil der europäischen Gesellschaft sind. Und wenn ich sage der europäischen Gesellschaft, meine ich, wir gehören zu den Nationalstaaten, in denen wir seit Jahrhunderten leben. Und da haben wir nicht mindere Rechte, sondern gleiche Rechte. Und der Staat, der Minderheiten wieder ausgrenzt, für den ist hinterher das Territorium zu klein. Der guckt dann über die Grenzen seiner Nachbarn. Und wir wissen alle aus Erfahrung, dass der Erste Weltkrieg eine Vorgeschichte hatte und der Zweite Weltkrieg ebenfalls. Und deswegen dürfen Nationalisten, Rassisten, Antisemiten und Antiziganisten keinen Platz mehr haben in Europa.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think that it's a good point to finish our panel. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions, but I believe that we're going to continue our discussion in next panels. Thank you very much. It was an honor to be with you. Thank you.
Our technical assistant working with us at area, and they will have access to the power tool, the USB with presentation, so the camera sticking in here. So maybe those that you already have, that can be
Dears, now you saw the first part from the international conference, which is named is Auschwitz Only Sleeping. It's about the Sinti and Roma narratives after the Holocaust. Now it's only short break, but you have to stay with us on Facebook and ROMEA TV, because the second part will start after half an hour. Stay with us, ROMEA TV.